The fatal geometry of the sky, August 17, 1943, 7:42 hours. Dodorura Airfield, New Guinea. The air in New Guinea did not just sit. It pressed down on you. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket of tropical humidity, smelling of rotting jungle vegetation, high-octane aviation fuel, and the metallic tang of hot engines. On this particular morning, the sun was already climbing, baking the crushed coral of the runway at Dodorura Airfield. Technical Sergeant James McKenna crouched beneath the left wing of a Lockheed P-38 Lightning. He was a man who spoke the language of machines better than he spoke to officers. His hands, stained permanently with grease and oil, rested on the cool aluminum of the twin-boom fighter. He was watching his pilot, Lieutenant Robert Hayes, prepare for a mission that, statistically speaking, he should not survive. Hayes was 23 years old, a farm kid from Iowa with a face that looked like it belonged in a high school yearbook rather than a combat zone. He had flown 6 combat missions. He had 0 confirmed kills. In the ruthless mathematics of 1943 aerial warfare, Hayes was prey. The intelligence report that morning was grim. The Japanese Imperial Navy had launched a patrol of 18 Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters to sweep the sector. Hayes would be flying straight into them. McKenna looked up at the aircraft he had maintained for 8 months. The P-38 Lightning was a marvel of American engineering. It was a twin-engine monster, distinctive for its twin-boom design, capable of incredible speeds in a straight line and dominant at high altitudes. It was heavily armed, concentrating its firepower in the nose rather than the wings, meaning a pilot didn't have to worry about convergence zones. If you could see it, you could hit it. But the P-38 had a secret. It was a fatal flaw that was killing American pilots every single day. It was a problem of geometry and time. The P-38 could not turn with a zero. The Mitsubishi Zero was a dancer. It was lightweight, devoid of armor, and built for one thing: agility. In a dogfight, a Zero could execute a full horizontal 360-degree turn in half the time it took a P-38 to do the same. In the deadly arena of air combat, that difference in time wasn't just a statistic. It was a death sentence. American doctrine was explicit. Every pilot, including Hayes, had the rules drilled into their heads until they dreamt about them. Never turn with a Zero. Never try to outmaneuver them. Use your speed. Use your altitude. Dive in, fire, climb out. Hit and run. It sounded perfect in a briefing room in California. It sounded logical in a manual. But up at 15,000 feet, when tracers were flying and adrenaline was dumping into your bloodstream, the doctrine often fell apart. The Japanese pilots were veterans. They knew the Americans' rules. They baited the P-38s into turns, cutting inside their radius with terrifying ease, slipping onto their tails, and shredding them. The 5th Air Force had lost 37 P-38s in the past 6 weeks alone. Most of those men were shot down after being caught in turning engagements they couldn't escape. McKenna had watched too many of them die. They were good men. They were just kids. They climbed into their cockpits with bravado and confidence. And they came back in pine boxes, or, more often, they didn't come back at all, leaving only an empty bunk and a letter to be written to a mother in Ohio or a wife in Texas. The official training manuals blamed pilot. Error, the instructors shouted. That the pilots weren't following the hit and run doctrine strictly enough, but McKenna knew better. He spent his days and nights inside the guts of these machines. He knew the problem wasn't the men flying the planes. It was the cables controlling them. The invisible slack, the control system of the P-38 was complex. The ailerons, the control surfaces on the wings that allowed the plane to roll and turn, were operated by long steel cables. These cables ran from the control stick in the cockpit, down through the fuselage, out through the long twin booms to the tail section, and then forward again through a series of pulleys to the wings. It was a long journey for a mechanical signal to travel. McKenna had discovered that the cable system had slack. It wasn't much, maybe 3/8 of an inch of play at full deflection, but in the precision world of aerodynamics, 3/8 of an inch was a chasm. That tiny bit of slack created a delay. When a pilot shoved the stick to the left to bank, there was a momentary hesitation, a fraction of a second, where the stick moved. But the aileron didn't. At high speeds, the airflow over the wings masked the problem. But at low speeds, or during the violent, high-G maneuvering of a dogfight, that delay was catastrophic. It meant that when a P-38 pilot saw a Zero turning and tried to follow or reverse, his plane would lag. It felt mushy, like the aircraft was moving through molasses. By the time the ailerons bit the air and the plane responded, the Zero was already gone, or worse, already behind him. McKenna had reported this. 2 months ago, he stood before the engineering officer, a man with clean fingernails and a shiny desk, and explained the slack. The officer had pulled out the technical specifications from Lockheed. "The cable tension is within specification, Sergeant," he had said, dismissing McKenna. "Factory tolerances allow for that slack. Changing it would void the warranty on the airframe. Besides, you are a field mechanic. You do not have authorization to modify flight control systems. That requires engineering approval from Lockheed, and Lockheed is 7,000 miles away in Burbank." So the slack remained. And the pilots kept dying. McKenna remembered Lieutenant David Chun, July 9, 1943. Chun had been a sharp kid from Sacramento who loved to talk about cars. Before the war, McKenna and Chun had bonded over discussions of engine timings and carburetors. Chun had flown a mission on a bright Tuesday morning. He came back 2 hours later, pale and shaking, with 3 bullet holes grouped tightly in his left boom. Chun told McKenna a story that made the mechanic's blood run cold. He had been jumped by a Zero. He tried to roll out and dive, just like the manual said. But the airplane felt slow. "It was like there was a delay," Chun had said, his hands trembling as he lit a cigarette. "I moved the stick, but she didn't roll fast enough. The Zero almost had me." McKenna had looked at the bullet holes. They were a tight grouping, perfect deflection shooting. The Japanese pilot had anticipated exactly where Chin would be. That shouldn't have been possible if the P-38 had rolled instantly. The only reason Chun survived was that his wingmen scared the Zero off. Chun didn't fly that plane again. It went to the depot for repairs. 3 weeks later, flying a different aircraft over Rabaul, Chun was killed. Same story. Caught in a turn. Couldn't roll out. Then there was Captain William Morrison. Morrison wasn't a rookie. He was a flight leader with 11 confirmed kills. He was an ace who knew the P-38's limitations intimately. On August 3rd, Morrison intercepted 8 Zeros over Oro Bay. He bagged one on the first pass. But when he tried to reverse his turn to clear his tail, his wingman heard him scream over the radio that his controls felt mushy. The Zeros stayed with him through the maneuver. They shot him down at 4,000 feet. Morrison died in the crash. McKenna's friend, a crew chief named Rodriguez, checked the wreckage. Everything was within spec. The cables were exactly where the manual said they should be. The official report read, "Pilot error." Rodriguez didn't believe it. McKenna didn't believe it. By mid-August, McKenna had watched 17 pilots die. The survivors all said the same thing. The plane is slow to respond in a fight. McKenna began to listen to the planes. He developed an ear for the specific tone the control cables made when plucked during maintenance. Loose cables sounded different than tight ones, a low, flat twang. Every P-38 on the line had that low twang. They were all within spec, but they were all loose. The desperation of August 16. The breaking point came on the evening of August 16th. The sun had set. painting the new Guinea sky in bruised purples and blood reds. The maintenance hangars were quieting down, the roar of the day fading into the buzz of insects and the distant hum of generators. McKenna was working late on Hayes's aircraft when the pilot walked in. Lieutenant Hayes looked like a ghost. He was 23, but that night he looked 50. The fear was radiating off him. He had flown 6 missions. He had followed the rules. And 6 times, the rules had almost gotten him killed. He walked up to McKenna, leaned against the boom of his P-38, and asked a question that wasn't really a question. It was a plea. "Is there anything you can do?" Hayes asked, his voice cracking slightly. "Anything at all to make this damn thing roll faster? I don't care if it's regulation. I don't care if it's authorized. If I go up there tomorrow with the plane flying like this, I'm dead." McKenna looked at the kid. He saw the terror in his eyes. He saw the knowledge of impending death. McKenna thought about the manual. He thought about the engineering officer. He thought about the court-martial that would surely follow if he was caught tampering with a flight control system. Then he thought about Chun. He thought about Morrison. He thought about the empty bunks. "Come back in the morning, Lieutenant," McKenna said quietly. "I'll see what I can do." The piano wire fix. McKenna waited until the hangar was empty. By 23 o'clock hours, most of the crew had gone to their bunks. The airfield was dark, save for the overhead lights in the maintenance bays that cast long, dancing shadows against the aluminum skins of the fighters. He worked alone. The air was thick and hot, smelling of oil and impending rain. McKenna went to his tool bag and retrieved an object he had been saving without fully knowing why. It was a 6-inch piece of high-tensile piano wire. He had scavenged it from the rudder trim system of a P-38 that had ground-looped and been scrapped 2 weeks earlier. He sat on the concrete floor of the hangar, his grease-stained coverall sticking to his skin. He took the stiff wire and a pair of heavy-duty pliers. His objective was simple in theory, difficult in execution. He needed to create a tension or something, to take up that fatal 3/8 inch of slack dot. He bent the wire into a Z shape. The steel fought him. It was strong, designed to withstand the stresses of flight. His hand slipped, and the wire gouged his thumb. Blood welled up, mixing with the grease on his hands. He wiped it on his leg and kept bending. It took him 8 minutes to get the shape right. The Z bend would act as a spring, an inline tensioner that would pull the cable tight, but allow it to flex under extreme load. Installation was the dangerous part. McKenna removed the inspection panel on the left boom of Hayes's aircraft. The space inside was cramped, a maze of aluminum ribs and hydraulic lines. He had to work blindly, jamming his arm into the boom, feeling for the clevis pin that connected the aileron cable to the pulley quadrant. He held a flashlight in his mouth, the beam shaking as he worked. If an officer walked in now, if the engineering officer decided to do a spot check, McKenna would be finished. He was violating a dozen Army Air Force regulations. He was modifying a combat aircraft with a non-standard part. If the wire snapped during flight, the cable could jam. Hayes would lose control and crash. McKenna would be responsible for manslaughter. His heart hammered against his ribs. The sweat ran down his back. He disconnected the cable, inserted the Z-shaped wire between the cable end and the pulley, and fought to reconnect the pin. The added tension made it a wrestling match. He had to force the system together, his muscles straining, his cut thumb throbbing. Finally, the pin clicked into place. McKenna pulled his arm out and grabbed the cable. He plucked it. Instead of the low, sloppy twang he was used to, the cable sang. It was a high, tight note. He moved the aileron by hand. There was no play, no slack. The movement was instant. It was perfect. He closed the inspection panel, wiped his blood off the fuselage, and cleaned his tools. He walked out of the hangar at 1:15 a.m. The jungle was noisy with night creatures. McKenna went to his bunk but didn't sleep. He lay there, staring at the canvas of his tent, wondering if he had just saved a life or signed a death warrant. The test of combat, August 17, 1943, 8:14 hours over the Huon Gulf. Lieutenant Hayes flew the number 3 position in a flight of 4 P-38s. They were cruising at 13,000 feet. The morning sun behind them, the perfect position for an ambush. Below them, against the deep blue of the ocean, the silhouettes of 9 Japanese Zeros appeared. They were flying in a loose formation, unaware of the American fighters lurking in the sun's glare. Hayes's element leader called the bounce. The 4 P-38s rolled over and began their dive. Hayes picked a Zero at the rear of the formation. He pushed the throttle forward, the twin Allison engines roaring as the airspeed indicator climbed past 350, then 380 miles per hour. The wind roared over the canopy. He closed the distance. The Zero grew in his gun sight. He could see the red Hinamaru, the rising sun insignia, painted on the fuselage. He could see the pilot's head moving. Hayes squeezed the trigger on his yoke. The nose of the P-38 erupted. 4.50 caliber machine guns and the single 20mm cannon shook the airframe. Tracers reached out, but the angle was slightly off. Sparks flew from the Zero's wing, but the plane didn't disintegrate. The Japanese pilot reacted instantly. He snap-rolled to the right and dove the classic defensive maneuver. In any previous mission, this was where Hayes would have lost him. He would have tried to follow, felt the mushy controls, and watched the Zero vanish. Hayes shoved the stick to the right, to follow. Snap. The P-38 rolled, instantly. There was no hesitation, no lag, no fighting the controls. It was as if the airplane was wired directly to Hayes's brain. The huge fighter rotated 90 degrees in a heartbeat. Hayes was shocked, but his instincts took over. He pulled back on the stick, keeping his nose on the diving Zero. The sight picture held steady. He fired again. A 3-second burst. The rounds walked up the Zero's fuselage, stitching it from tail to cockpit. The enemy aircraft shuddered, then exploded. Pieces of aluminum and glass flew backward. The Zero rolled inverted and plummeted toward the jungle, trailing a long ribbon of black smoke. Hayes's first kill, but there was no time to breathe. Bandits, 12 o'clock high. His wingman screamed. 3 more Zeros were diving on Hayes. They had seen him kill their wingmen and were coming for blood. They were coming fast, already in firing position. Hayes's training screamed, "Dive! Run, don't turn." But he was too low to dive and too slow to run. If he ran, they would catch him. He did the unthinkable. He reversed his turn. He slammed the stick hard to the left and pulled. The modified P-38 bit into the air. The piano wire tensioner held. The cable stayed tight. The aircraft snapped around with a violence that pinned Hayes into his seat. The nose swung through the horizon, bringing him face to face with the lead attacker. The Japanese pilot must have been terrified. He was expecting a sluggish American turn, a wide arc he could easily cut inside. Instead, he was looking down the barrels of a P-38 that had just reversed direction like a lightweight fighter. The Zero was exposed. Hayes fired. The shells tore into the Zero's wing root. The wing folded upward, tearing away from the fuselage. The Zero tumbled out of the sky. 2 kills in 30 seconds. The remaining 2 Zeros tried to trap him. They entered a scissor alternating turns designed to force an opponent to overshoot. It was a maneuver that required precise, rapid roll rates. It was a maneuver a P-38 was never supposed to win. Hayes stayed with them. Left, right, left. Every time they reversed, his P-38 snapped with them. The invisible weights were gone. One of the Zero pilots made a mistake. He reversed too hard, bleeding off too much speed. Hayes cut inside his turn radius. He was close now, less than 200 feet. The Zero filled his windscreen. He hammered the trigger. The Zero disintegrated. Debris clattered against Hayes's wings as he flew through the fireball. 3 kills. The 4th Zero fled. Hayes checked his fuel gauges. He was running low. He pulled out of the fight, climbed back to altitude, and reformed with his flight. The entire engagement had lasted 7 minutes. The secret spreads when Hayes landed at WWII at 9:03. McKenna was standing on the flight line, wiping his hands on a rag, his heart in his throat. He watched the P-38 taxi in. The engines shut down. The propellers spun to a halt. Hayes climbed out of the cockpit. His flight suit was soaked through with sweat. His hands were shaking from the adrenaline dump. He walked straight to McKenna. He didn't smile. He just looked at the mechanic with wide, unbelieving eyes. "It worked," Hayes whispered. "My God, it worked." They weren't the only ones who knew. Captain Frank Mitchell, an ace with the 475th Fighter Group, had watched the fight from 15,000 feet. He had seen Hayes's P-38 rolling and snapping like a toy. Mitchell knew planes, and he knew pilots. Hayes was good, but he wasn't that good. The airplane was doing something it shouldn't be able to do. Mitchell cornered Hayes in the debriefing room. "What did you do to your ship?" he demanded. Hayes pointed to the maintenance hangar. "Ask Sergeant McKenna." Mitchell found McKenna 2 hours later. He asked the same question. McKenna, realizing the cat was out of the bag, told him the truth. He explained the piano wire. He explained the tension. He explained the violation of regulations. Mitchell listened quietly. When McKenna finished, the captain didn't threaten him with a court-martial. He rolled up his sleeve. "Put it on my plane," he said. "Tonight." "Captain, if this goes wrong," McKenna started. "If we don't do it, we die anyway," Mitchell cut him off. "I've lost 4 men this month. I don't care about the regulations. Fix my plane." That night, McKenna modified Mitchell's aircraft. The next day, Mitchell went up and came back raving about the handling. He told his wingman. The wingman told his crew chief. It started as a whisper. Then it became a movement. The McKenna fix spread like a virus through the squadrons in New Guinea. Crew chiefs began scavenging piano wire. They taught each other how to bend the Z shape. They showed each other how to install it in the dark, how to hide it during inspections. By early September, nearly 40 P-38s in the theater were flying with the unauthorized modification. The officers in engineering noted that the pilots were happier, but they couldn't figure out why. The kill ratios began to shift. Asterisk the hunter becomes the hunted. The change was invisible to the eye, but undeniable in the statistics. In July, the kill ratio had been 2 American losses for every 1 Japanese loss. By late August, it was 1.3 to 1. By mid-September, it was even. Then, it tipped in favor of the Americans. The Japanese pilots were the first to realize something was wrong. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai was a legend in the Imperial Japanese Navy. With 64 confirmed kills, he was a samurai of the sky. He knew the Americans' tactics better than they did. On September 3rd, over WWII, Sakai engaged a lone P-38. He went into his standard routine. He baited the American into a turning fight, waited for the P-38 to begin its sluggish roll, and prepared to snap turn back inside the radius for the kill. He knew the timing down to the millisecond, but the P-38 didn't sluggishly roll. It snapped. Before Sakai could complete his maneuver, the American had reversed and was firing. Sakai barely escaped a head-on collision, diving away in shock. He returned to base confused. "The Americans are flying differently," he reported. "Their planes are faster, sharper." Japanese intelligence was baffled. They examined wreckage of downed P-38s. They looked for new engines, new hydraulic systems, new aerodynamic surfaces. They found nothing. The 6-inch piece of piano wire hidden inside the boom looked like standard debris or original equipment. They couldn't fight what they couldn't see. The confidence of the Zero pilots began to crack. For 2 years they had owned the turning fight. Now the P-38s were staying with them, matching their turns and using their superior engine power to dominate the vertical. The 11th Air Fleet lost 38 fighters in September. By the end of the month, the Japanese High Command issued a stunning order: do not engage P-38s unless you have a significant numerical advantage. The Zero, once the terror of the Pacific, was now running away. The silent legacy, the secret couldn't last forever. In October 1943, an eagle-eyed maintenance inspector at WWII noticed the inconsistent cable tension readings on several aircraft. He investigated and found the piano wires. The report went up the chain of command. It landed on the desks of generals and engineers. There was a brief moment where court-martials were discussed. Regulations had been broken. Authority had been usurped. But the results were undeniable. The squadrons using the wire were surviving. They were winning. In November, a team of engineers from Lockheed arrived in New Guinea. They were prepared to scold the mechanics. Instead, they tested the modification. They ran the math. They flew the planes. Their conclusion was humble and absolute: the modification is safe. It is effective. It fixes the problem. Lockheed took the data back to California. When the new P-38J model rolled off the assembly line in December 1943, it featured a factory-installed power-boosted aileron system that mimicked the effect of McKenna's wire. But there were no medals for James McKenna. There was no parade. The official Lockheed documentation credited engineering analysis for the improvement. McKenna's name appeared on no patent, no report, no citation. He didn't care. Hayes survived the war. He flew 63 missions and finished with 11 kills. He went home to Iowa, married his sweetheart, and became a crop duster. But every year, on August 17th, the phone would ring in McKenna's garage in Long Beach. It was Hayes, calling to say thank you. Calling to say, I'm alive because of you. Captain Mitchell retired as a colonel. He spent his career telling young maintenance officers the story of the piano wire, teaching them that innovation often comes from the bottom up, from the men with grease under their fingernails. James McKenna returned to Long Beach in 1946. He opened an auto repair shop. He fixed transmissions and carburetors for 42 years. He rarely spoke of the war. When customers asked about his service, he'd just nod and say, I was a mechanic. I fixed airplanes. He died in 2006 at the age of 88. In the back office of his garage. Long after he was gone, there remained a faded black and white photograph. It showed a young man in stained coveralls, squinting against the New Guinea sun, standing next to the nose of a P-38 Lightning. It is a photo of a man who broke every rule to save the men he served. It is a testament to the fact that in the chaos of war, the difference between life and death is sometimes measured in inches of wire, and the courage of a mechanic who refused to let his pilots die because of a manual.